The morning sun bounced off the towering glass skyscrapers, filling the expansive office with a golden glow. On the 50th floor of his New York headquarters, Ethan Caldwell stood near the window, surveying the city below. At 42, he was at the peak of his career. A self-made millionaire husband who had built his empire from nothing. Success, power, and wealth were all his. Yet deep inside, there was an emptiness he refused to acknowledge. "Mr. Caldwell, your next meeting begins in 5 minutes," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Thank you, Rachel. I'll be there shortly," Ethan replied, adjusting his designer silk tie. As he walked toward the conference room, a flicker of memory surfaced. He saw himself at 25, an ambitious, hungry graduate determined to dominate Wall Street. "You won't last a week here, kid," a senior broker had scoffed at him years ago. Ethan clenched his fists even now, remembering the relentless drive that had brought him to the top. Miles away, in a quiet apartment overlooking Central Park, Olivia Caldwell took a deep breath as she finished getting ready. At 31, she was still strikingly beautiful, but exhaustion was evident in her eyes. Pregnancy had taken a toll on her, both physically and emotionally, but today she needed to put on a brave face. "You can do this, Olivia," she whispered herself in the mirror. Today wasn't just another lunch date with her millionaire husband. It was supposed to be a moment of joy, the day she would tell him about their child. Resting a hand on her still flat belly, she felt the weight of uncertainty press down on her. Back at the office, Ethan sealed another multi-million-dollar deal, the sound of executives applauding filling the room. "Congratulations, Ethan. Another jewel in the crown," one of his associates said, shaking his hand. Ethan forced a smile. "That's why we're here, right? To build empires." Meanwhile, Olivia stepped into the upscale shopping mall, her heart pounding. She glanced at the gleaming store windows, remembering how Ethan used to surprise her with lavish gifts in the early years of their marriage. But luxury meant little when love was fading. "Mrs. Caldwell?" A sales associate greeted her warmly. "We just got a new collection that would be perfect for you." Olivia forced a smile. "Not today. I'm just waiting for my husband." She turned toward the restaurant where they had planned to meet, clutching her purse tightly. "It's now or never," she thought. She imagined Ethan's reaction, the excitement in his eyes when she told him the news. But deep down, a whisper of doubt gnawed at her. Ethan was always so absorbed in his business, so caught up in his world of high-stakes deals and power. Would there be room for a baby in his life? She checked her watch. He was late. Again. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the menu, not out of hunger, but to keep her hands from shaking. "You can do this," she murmured, trying to convince herself that everything would be okay. Little did she know, in a few short minutes, her world was about to shatter. Those words echoed in Ethan Caldwell's mind. "Look at me now," he muttered, a sharp glint in his eyes as he adjusted his cufflinks. He had proved everyone wrong. He had built an empire from nothing. And now, at 42, he was one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. Miles away, in a high-rise apartment overlooking Central Park, Olivia Caldwell took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied a final touch of lipstick. "You can do this, Olivia," she whispered, meeting her reflection in the mirror. It was just lunch with her millionaire husband, yet the weight of this moment felt different. Resting a protective hand on her still flat belly, she could feel the secret growing inside her. "How am I going to tell him?" she murmured, anxiety tightening her chest. Back at the office, Ethan sealed another multi-million-dollar deal. "Congratulations, Ethan." An executive clapped him on the back. "Another jewel in your crown." Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what we're here for, right? To build empires?" he said, the words almost automatic now. Meanwhile, Olivia stepped into the luxury shopping mall, her heart hammering in her chest. She glanced at the elegant storefronts, remembering how Ethan used to shower her with lavish gifts in the early years of their marriage. "Mrs. Caldwell." A cheerful sales associate greeted her warmly. "We just got a new collection that would be perfect for you." Forcing a polite smile, Olivia shook her head. "Not today. I'm just waiting for my husband." The saleswoman nodded knowingly. "Of course. Enjoy your lunch." Walking toward the upscale restaurant, Olivia instinctively placed a hand on her belly, as if protecting the life inside her. "It's now or never," she told herself, stepping inside. Mrs. Caldwell, welcome. The maitre d' greeted her with a warm smile. Your husband hasn't arrived yet, but your table is ready. Olivia nodded, following him as nervous energy coiled in her stomach. As she sat down, her mind drifted to the future. A baby in her arms, Ethan's proud smile, a happy family. But doubt whispered in the back of her mind. Ethan was always so focused on power and success. Would there be room for a baby in his life? She checked her watch. He was late, as usual. Picking up the menu, she skimmed over the options, not because she was hungry, but to keep her hands from shaking. You can do this, she told herself again. You'll be a family. Everything will be okay. But she had no idea that within minutes, her world would come crashing down, and the empire Ethan had spent years building would finally begin to crack. Olivia drummed her fingers against the table, her gaze flickering between the entrance and the time on her watch. Ethan was late, as usual. She let out a slow, measured breath, trying to steady the anxiety gnawing at her chest. Then she saw him. But he wasn't alone. Ethan strode confidently through the gleaming corridors of the luxury shopping mall, his tall frame impossible to miss. At his side, a striking woman laughed at something he said, her manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. Olivia's breath caught. She knew that woman. Victoria Bennett, the new executive at Ethan's firm. This can't be happening, she murmured under her breath. Her heart pounded, but before she could stop herself, she rose from her seat and walked toward them, her eyes locked on Ethan's face. Ethan, she called, her voice unsteady. He turned. For a split second, shock and something else, guilt, flashed across his face, before he quickly masked it with cold indifference. Olivia, he said, his tone void of emotion. What are you doing here? Victoria's eyes glimmered with amusement as she glanced between them, a knowing smirk on her lips. We had lunch plans, Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. Don't you remember? Ethan shrugged. Must have slipped my mind. I'm busy, as you can see. A sharp pain twisted in Olivia's chest. Ethan, I need to talk to you. It's important. Now's not a good time. His words were like ice, cutting through her like a blade. Victoria let out a soft, cruel laugh. Oh, sweetheart, she purred. Surely you realize Ethan has more important things to do than entertain a trophy wife? The words stung. Olivia's vision blurred as tears burned her eyes. Ethan, please. Enough, Olivia. Ethan's voice suddenly boomed through the mall, his frustration spilling over. People turned, their curious gazes settling on the scene unfolding before them. Can't you see you're embarrassing us? Ethan snapped. Go home. I don't have time for your drama. The silence was suffocating. Shoppers whispered to each other, some casting Olivia sympathetic glances while others simply watched in stunned fascination. She felt as though she'd been slapped in the face, the humiliation searing into her skin. How could you? She whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan simply rolled his eyes, his expression filled with irritation. Grow up, Olivia, he scoffed. This is how the real world works. Then, without another glance, he moved to walk past her. Victoria still clinging to his arm, a victorious smile playing on her lips. Something inside Olivia shattered. A strangled sob tore from her throat as she turned and fled, shoving past strangers, desperate to escape the nightmare that had just become her reality. Oh my God, did you see that? A woman whispered to her friend as they stood frozen in shock. Poor thing, another murmured, shaking her head. A middle-aged man nearby frowned in clear disapproval. Man, that's just wrong. Your wife deserves more respect. Ethan barely spared the man a glance. His cold blue eyes stayed fixed on Olivia's retreating figure, watching as she disappeared into the crowd. Then, without a word, he turned back to Victoria. Let's go, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Victoria smirked, looping her arm through his as they walked toward the exit, seemingly oblivious to the whispers and stares still lingering in the air. Meanwhile, Olivia ran, her vision blurred by tears. She barely noticed when she bumped into strangers, muttered apologies lost between ragged breaths. Ma'am, are you okay? A security guard reached out to steady her. She shook her head, unable to speak, and kept moving. The freezing New York air hit her tear-streaked face as she finally stumbled outside. Panting, she clutched her stomach as if shielding the baby inside her. Oh God, she sobbed, her chest heaving. What am I going to do now? Inside the mall, people were still buzzing about what they had witnessed. Did you see his face? A teenager whispered to her friends. Not even a hint of guilt. Men like him never change, an older woman muttered bitterly. But Ethan and Victoria didn't care. Sliding into his luxury sports car, Ethan leaned back against the seat. "Well, that was interesting," Victoria commented, amusement laced in her voice. Ethan merely shrugged. "She'll get over it. She always does." Yet, as the car pulled away, a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered something he refused to acknowledge. This time, maybe he had gone too far. On the cold New York sidewalk, Olivia hugged herself, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. Just hours ago, she had dreamed of a happy future, a family with Ethan, their baby bringing them closer together. Now, that dream lay in shattered pieces at her feet. With one last look at the glowing city around her, she turned and walked away, not knowing where she was going, only certain that she could never turn back. When Olivia reached her apartment, she shut the door behind her with a soft click. Silence swallowed her, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Slowly, she slid down to the floor, her back against the door as sobs racked her body. Memories invaded her, refusing to let her rest. 5 years ago. Laughter bubbled from her lips as Ethan guided her, her eyes covered by a silk blindfold. "Where are we going?" she had giggled, the excitement clear in her voice. "Patience, love," he had murmured, his hands warm against hers. When the blindfold was removed, she gasped. They stood on top of the Empire State Building, the New York skyline shimmering below them like a sea of stars. And there, under the night sky, Ethan had dropped to one knee, his piercing blue eyes filled with love. "Olivia, will you make me the happiest man in the world and marry me?" The contrast between the memory and reality was unbearable. Olivia stood frozen for a moment before her body finally moved on instinct. Her steps felt heavy as she staggered toward the bedroom. Her gaze landed on the wedding photo resting on the nightstand, Ethan looking at her with so much love. Where had that man gone? With trembling hands, Olivia opened the closet, grabbing an empty suitcase. One by one, she pulled clothes from their hangers, folding them with precision, but each piece felt like a fragment of her heart being torn away. "I can't stay here anymore," she whispered, silent tears rolling down her face. She hesitated, then stepped toward the desk, picking up a pen and a piece of paper. The words came effortlessly, a mixture of pain, disappointment, and a sliver of hope for the future. "Ethan, when we got married, I promised to stand by you in joy and in sorrow, but I never imagined the sorrow would come from you. Today, I saw it clearly. The man I love no longer exists. Maybe he never did. I can't keep living a lie. I'm leaving, taking with me not only my shattered hopes but also a new life. Yes, Ethan, I'm pregnant. Maybe one day you'll understand what you've lost. Until then, goodbye." She folded the letter and placed it neatly on the perfectly made bed. Taking one last look at the apartment that had once felt like home, she grabbed her suitcase and walked out, her heart breaking with every step. Hours later, Ethan stepped inside, pulling off his tie. "Olivia?" he called, his voice echoing through the silent space. A frown creased his brow as he moved through the empty rooms, an unsettling feeling creeping into his chest. When he reached the bedroom, his gaze locked onto the letter. As he read, his face shifted from confusion to shock, then to pure rage. With a sharp exhale, he crumpled the paper in his fist and hurled it against the wall. "Damn it, Olivia!" he roared into the empty room. "You can't just walk away like this." But she could, and she had. Across town, in a luxurious event hall, Ethan stood before a crowd of executives and celebrities, his tailored suit pristine, his expression composed. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career, securing his position as one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. A toast to Ethan Caldwell. The CEO of a rival firm announced, raising his champagne glass. The man who transformed the industry. Glasses clinked, laughter rang out, and Ethan lifted his flute, the bubbly liquid sliding down his throat. But it tasted bitter. The applause around him grew louder, but his mind was elsewhere. Hours later, Ethan stepped into his penthouse apartment, his tie loose around his collar. Behind him, Victoria followed, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She laughed, slightly unsteady from the drinks, her manicured fingers tracing patterns on his arm. But Ethan didn't respond. His thoughts were still back in that bedroom, where a single piece of paper had shattered his world. "What an incredible party," Victoria laughed, tossing herself onto the sleek leather sofa. Did you see the look on their faces when you announced the merger? Priceless. Ethan barely reacted. Instead, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling as he took a slow sip. Victoria frowned. What's wrong? You just made history. You should be celebrating. I'm tired, Victoria, Ethan muttered. Maybe you should go home. Her smile vanished. Go home? She echoed, sitting up straight. I thought I was staying here tonight. After all, this is your biggest deal yet. Shouldn't we be celebrating? Ethan exhaled sharply, suddenly irritated by her presence. Look, I just need to be alone right now. We can talk tomorrow. Victoria scoffed, shaking her head. You're dismissing me? After everything we've done together? It's not like that, I just… No, she cut him off, standing and grabbing her purse. I get it. You got what you wanted, and now I'm disposable. Before he could respond, she stormed toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. With one final glare, she slammed it behind her. Silence filled the massive penthouse. Ethan sighed, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city pulsed with life, completely indifferent to the personal chaos unraveling at the top of that skyscraper. His gaze drifted to the shelf. A framed photo. Him and Olivia on their wedding day. She was beaming, her eyes full of love. Love that had once been directed at him without hesitation. His fingers traced over the glass. What have I done? He whispered. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of meetings, aggressive deals, and sleepless nights. Ethan threw himself deeper into work, drowning in contracts and negotiations, believing that more money, more success, more power would fill the emptiness clawing at his chest. One particularly stressful afternoon, his assistant stepped into his office looking hesitant. Mr. Caldwell, there's a man here to see you. He says he's an old friend. Ethan frowned. I don't have old friends. Send him away. Before the assistant could respond, the door swung open and a middle-aged man strode in, a warm smile on his face. Ethan? Long time no see. Ethan stared, confused. Sorry, do I know you? The man's smile faltered slightly. It's me, Michael. We were roommates in college, remember? A flicker of recognition passed through Ethan's sharp blue eyes. Michael? In the flesh, Michael grinned, settling into a chair like he belonged there. I'm in town on business and thought I'd stop by to see how you've been. I heard about your success, congratulations. Ethan nodded stiffly. Thanks. Michael leaned back in his chair, a warm smile on his face. How have you been? Can't complain, work's going well, the kids are growing up, Sarah sends her regards. Michael's tone was light, but then he hesitated before adding, By the way, how's Olivia? The name hit like a gut punch. Ethan's jaw tightened. Olivia and I, we separated. Michael's smile faded. Oh, Ethan, I'm sorry. You two seemed so happy together. Ethan averted his gaze, unable to meet his old friend's sympathetic eyes. Things change, he said flatly. Michael sighed, sensing the conversation was over. He stood, adjusting his suit. Well, it was good to see you. If you ever need to talk. Thanks for stopping by, Ethan interrupted, already moving to escort him to the door. As Michael left, Ethan found himself alone once more in his massive, empty office, the walls lined with awards and framed recognitions that suddenly felt hollow. That night, back in his penthouse overlooking the New York skyline, Ethan opened an expensive bottle of whiskey and poured himself a drink. He sank onto the couch, his glass in one hand, the remote in the other, flipping through channels mindlessly. The television buzzed with stories of corporate takeovers and financial conquests. Ethan Caldwell, the business genius, a news anchor announced. The man who has everything, another voice chimed in. Ethan let out a bitter laugh and downed his drink in one gulp. Everything? He had money, he had power. But sitting there alone in his luxury apartment, Ethan Caldwell had never felt so empty. Staggering to his feet, he walked to the balcony, gripping the railing as he looked out at the glittering city below. Millions of windows, millions of lives. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to feel it. The loss, the regret, the overwhelming ache of what he had thrown away. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself cry. Miles away, in a Boston hospital, Olivia's scream echoed through the corridors. She clutched the nurse's hand, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. You're doing great, Olivia, Dr. Martinez encouraged. One more push. With every ounce of strength she had left, Olivia bore down. Then a sound filled the room, the sharp, unmistakable cry of a newborn. It's a girl, the doctor announced, lifting the baby so Olivia could see. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat as she reached for her daughter. "My baby," she whispered, her heart swelling despite the exhaustion. "My Sophie." The nurses cleaned and weighed the infant, but Olivia never took her eyes off her. Sophie was tiny, perfect, with dark tufts of hair and eyes so blue they made Olivia's chest tighten. Ethan's eyes. The thought stung. He should have been here, but Olivia pushed the pain aside. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the tiny life she had just brought into the world. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Olivia paced the small nursery, cradling Sophie in her arms. "Shh, it's okay, my love," she whispered, rocking her gently. It was 3 in the morning, and Sophie's cries hadn't stopped for hours. The exhaustion clung to Olivia like a heavy weight, her body aching from sleepless nights. Then, the doorbell rang. Confused, Olivia hesitated before making her way to the door, still holding Sophie close. Standing there was an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm Edna, your neighbor from 3B. I heard the baby crying and thought, maybe I could help?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, but exhaustion won. "Please, come in," she said, grateful beyond words. Edna reached for Sophie with practiced ease, holding her like she had done it 1,000 times before. Within minutes, Sophie's cries softened, her little eyes fluttering shut. "How did you do that?" Olivia asked, amazed. Edna chuckled. "Years of practice, dear. I raised 5 children and helped with 7 grandchildren. If you ever need help, just call," she added gently. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. Weeks passed, and Olivia slowly found her rhythm as a mother. She adapted to the sleepless nights, the endless feedings, and the quiet, precious moments when Sophie would curl against her chest, safe and warm. But something nagged at her. Sophie was different. She was quieter than other babies, sometimes too still. And then there was the slight bluish tint to her lips that Olivia couldn't ignore. Her stomach twisted with worry as she scheduled an appointment with the pediatrician. Dr. Simmons examined Sophie carefully, her expression growing serious. "Mrs. Thompson," she finally said, "I detected a murmur in Sophie's heart." Olivia's breath caught. Is it serious?" Her voice trembled. "We can't be sure yet," Dr. Simmons replied gently. "But the sooner we diagnose it, the better her chances will be." The next few days were a blur of tests, consultations, and sleepless worry. Then, the final diagnosis came. "Sophie has a congenital heart condition," the cardiologist explained. "She'll need surgery and constant monitoring." Olivia's arms instinctively tightened around her daughter. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered, gazing down at Sophie, who slept peacefully in her arms. Between doctor's visits and caring for Sophie, Olivia barely had a moment to think, but an idea began forming in her mind. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she flipped open a notebook and began scribbling. She thought of her work as a teacher, the children she had met, kids who lacked access to quality education. What if she could change that? She tapped the pen against the paper, a spark of determination igniting within her. The next morning, she picked up the phone. "Edna, could you watch Sophie for a few hours? There's something I need to do." With Sophie safely in Edna's care, Olivia made her way to the town hall, her heart pounding with nerves. By the time she returned home hours later, exhaustion weighed on her, but hope burned stronger than ever. "How did it go, dear?" Edna asked, gently handing Sophie back to her. Olivia kissed the top of her daughter's head, inhaling the soft scent of baby powder. "I took the first step toward making a dream come true," she said. Edna raised a curious brow. "I'm opening a school for underprivileged children." A flicker of admiration crossed Edna's face. "That's wonderful, Olivia, but can you really handle this? And Sophie?" Olivia glanced down at her daughter, who looked up at her with wide blue eyes. "I have to try," she said, her voice steady, "for Sophie, and for all the kids who need a chance." The months that followed were a whirlwind of challenges, sleepless nights, endless meetings, moments of doubt. But each time Sophie smiled, each time another obstacle was overcome, Olivia knew she was on the right path. One afternoon, she stood in front of the old brick building that would soon be transformed into her school. Sophie nestled in her arms, gurgling softly. "Look, Sophie," Olivia whispered. "This is our new beginning, our chance to make a difference." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Sophie let out a tiny laugh. Olivia hugged her daughter tightly, her heart swelling with love and hope. The pain of leaving Ethan, the struggles of single motherhood, the constant worry over Sophie's health, it had all led her here. And she was ready for whatever came next. "We made it, my little one," Olivia murmured. "Together, we can do anything." Across the city, in a sleek high-rise office, Ethan Caldwell sat in silence, the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional clink of ice in his whiskey glass the only sounds. 3 years had passed since Olivia left. She had taken with her not only their future but a secret he never knew existed. The sharp ring of his phone cut through the quiet. Frowning, Ethan picked it up. "Caldwell," he answered, his tone sharp. His assistant hesitated on the other end. "Sir, there's a call on line 2. It's about Mrs. Thompson." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Olivia. He hadn't heard that name in years. His pulse pounded as he pressed the button. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm, professional. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Dr. Martinez from Boston General Hospital. I'm calling about Sophie Thompson." The breath left Ethan's lungs. Sophie Thompson. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, your daughter." Ethan's world came to a screeching halt. "My daughter?" The doctor hesitated, sensing his shock. "Our records indicate that you are the father of Sophie Thompson, born 3 years ago." Ethan gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. "She needs urgent cardiac surgery." The words blurred as his mind spun. He had a daughter, with Olivia. "Mr. Caldwell, are you still there?" He swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. Yes, I'm listening. What does Sophie need?" Dr. Martinez explained the procedure, the risks, the urgency, but Ethan barely heard her. His thoughts were trapped in the past. 5 years ago, they had been curled up on the couch, Olivia nestled in his arms, their laughter filling the room. "Do you want kids someday?" she had asked, tilting her head to look at him. Ethan had chuckled. "Of course, I picture a little girl with your eyes and my smile." She had smiled, kissing him softly. "She'll be perfect." 3.5 years ago, Olivia had stood before him, her hands trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something," she had started, but he had barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, love, I have a meeting. Can it wait?" Her disappointment had been clear. "Sure, later." But later never came. And weeks after that, he had humiliated her in the mall, publicly casting her aside. She had disappeared from his life forever. Back in the present, Ethan hung up the phone, stunned, breathless, shattered. He had a daughter who was sick. With shaking hands, he picked up his personal phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Olivia's name. His finger hovered over the call button. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he pressed it. The phone rang, straight to voicemail. He exhaled sharply, gripping the device tighter. "Olivia," he began, his voice hoarse. I just found out about Sophie. Please call me back. I need to know everything." Hanging up, he stood abruptly, striding toward the window of his towering office. Outside, New York pulsed with its usual energy, oblivious to the emotional earthquake tearing through him. "A daughter," he murmured, the reality finally sinking in. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of emotions and frantic activity. He instructed his legal team to track down every detail about Sophie and Olivia's whereabouts. He canceled every meeting for the next few days, ignoring the confused protests of his business partners. As night fell, he sat in his dimly lit apartment, his whiskey untouched. He scrolled through his phone, staring at old photos. Olivia on the beach, their arms wrapped around each other in Paris, her eyes bright with love on their wedding day. "How did we get here?" he whispered. For the first time in years, Ethan knew exactly what he had to do. He needed to go to Boston. He needed to see Sophie. And he needed to face Olivia. Ethan knew that leaving for Boston meant walking away from everything he had built over the last few years. Melissa had been calling nonstop, but he ignored her. Finally, he answered. "Ethan, where are you? We have dinner with the investors tonight." Melissa's voice was sharp with irritation. He took a deep breath, gripping the phone tighter. "Melissa, I can't go. Something happened. Something that changes everything." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone shifting to confusion. Ethan hesitated, the words still foreign on his tongue. "I have a daughter." The silence on the other end was suffocating. "With Olivia," he continued. "She's in Boston, and I need to go there." For a moment, Melissa didn't respond. Then her voice turned cold. "I see. And what about us, Ethan? What about everything we've built together?" He closed his eyes, torn between guilt and the undeniable truth. I don't know, Melissa, but right now, nothing else matters. I have to meet my daughter." He hung up before she could reply, staring at the half-packed suitcase on his bed. In a few hours, he would be in Boston, stepping into an uncertain future. But with one certainty, he was a father. The taxi pulled up in front of Boston General Hospital, and Ethan felt his pulse race. After a long, tense journey, he was finally here. Inside this building were Olivia and the daughter he had just discovered existed. His steps were hesitant as he crossed the hospital entrance, the familiar scent of antiseptic hitting his senses. At the information desk, he was about to ask for Sophie Thompson when movement at the far end of the hallway caught his eye. His breath hitched. There she was. Olivia stood near a nurse, her posture tense. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, and there was a new hardness to her expression, a strength that hadn't been there before. But it wasn't just Olivia who made his chest tighten. Beside her, holding her hand, was a small figure. A little girl. Ethan's throat went dry. Sophie. She was the spitting image of Olivia, the same golden curls, the same delicate features. But when she turned her face, he saw them, his own blue eyes staring back at him. Time seemed to freeze. Ethan felt like an intruder standing there, watching the life he could have had, the family he had unknowingly abandoned. His body refused to move, his voice caught in his throat. It was Sophie who noticed him first, her little brow furrowed as she tilted her head, looking at him curiously. And in that moment, Ethan knew everything in his life was about to change. For a brief second, Ethan and Sophie locked eyes. Her blue gaze was full of curiosity, mirroring his own. The little girl tugged on Olivia's sleeve and pointed in his direction. Olivia turned, and the moment her eyes met his, time stood still. Shock, fear, anger, and something else Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "Ethan?" Olivia whispered, her lips forming his name as if she couldn't believe he was real. It jolted him from his trance. His legs finally obeyed, carrying him toward them, his heart pounding so loudly he swore the entire Boston hospital could hear it. "Olivia," he breathed when he was close enough. I came as soon as I heard." Her grip on Sophie tightened, her body instinctively shifting to shield their daughter. "How did you find out?" Olivia's voice was guarded, a mixture of pain, fear, and defiance. "The hospital called me," Ethan admitted. His gaze flickered between her and Sophie. "They needed my authorization for the surgery." Olivia's eyes closed briefly as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, they were filled with fierce determination. "Let's talk in private." She glanced at Sophie, then at the nearby nurse. Ethan nodded, following Olivia down the hall to an empty waiting room. Sophie stayed behind, watching them curiously as the door shut. As soon as they were alone, Olivia's emotions spilled over like a dam breaking. "How dare you show up like this?" she hissed, years of bitterness and heartache laced in her voice. "After everything, you think you can just walk back into our lives?" "Olivia, please," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I didn't know." Her laugh was bitter. "And when exactly was I supposed to tell you, Ethan? When you were too busy closing deals? Or maybe when you humiliated me in front of half of New York?" Each word landed like a punch, and Ethan felt the weight of his past crushing down on him. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words weren't enough. "I was a fool, but now I want to do the right thing, for Sophie." Olivia studied him for a long time, as if trying to determine if he was being sincere. Finally, she let out a slow breath. The anger in her eyes softened just slightly, giving way to exhaustion. "Sophie has a congenital heart condition," she said quietly. "She needs surgery. That's why we're here." Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. His daughter, the child he had only just discovered, was seriously ill. What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's eyes widened slightly at his use of we. "The doctors say the surgery has a good chance of success," she admitted. "But it's expensive. And the recovery—" Ethan nodded, determination replacing the shock in his eyes. "I'll pay for everything. Anything Sophie needs." For a moment, Olivia looked as if she might argue, but then she simply nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. A soft knock interrupted them, and a nurse entered, leading Sophie into the room. The little girl clung to Olivia's leg, her wide blue eyes peeking out at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Ethan slowly knelt to her level, his heart pounding. "Hi, Sophie." he said gently. I'm your dad. Sophie studied him for a moment, her small fingers gripping Olivia's jeans. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she offered him a tiny, hesitant smile. Hi, she said softly. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Tentatively, he extended his hand. Sophie hesitated, but after a beat, reached out and placed her tiny hand in his. The warmth of that small gesture broke something open inside him. Olivia stood nearby, emotions flickering across her face. Anger for Ethan's absence, grief for the past, uncertainty about what his return meant for the future. But beneath all of it, buried deep, there was a tiny flicker of something else. Hope. Ethan spoke to Sophie carefully, asking about her favorite colors, animals, the shows she liked to watch. She answered in shy whispers at first, but with each passing moment, she opened up just a little more. For the briefest second, Olivia allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had prepared for. A future where maybe, just maybe, Ethan could be part of Sophie's life. But reality came crashing back, and she pushed the thought away. Right now, Sophie's health was the only thing that mattered. Everything else would have to wait. In the days that followed, Ethan became a constant presence at the hospital. He spent hours by Sophie's bedside, reading to her, playing games, trying, desperately, to make up for lost time. "What's your favorite color?" he asked one afternoon, holding a coloring book. "Purple," Sophie said, her voice excited, her eyes shining. Ethan smiled, handing her the purple crayon. As she colored, her little face scrunched in deep concentration, and Ethan couldn't help but watch in awe. Near the door, Olivia observed them, her emotions tangled. Seeing Ethan make an effort was both comforting and painful. When Sophie finally drifted to sleep, Olivia spoke. "We need to talk," she said softly. Out in the hallway, the air between them was thick with tension. "Why now, Ethan?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why decide to be a father now?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know I made terrible mistakes," he admitted. "But when I found out about Sophie, everything changed. I want to do the right thing." Olivia nodded slowly, but caution still lingered in her eyes. Days later, Ethan accompanied her to the school she had founded, walking through the colorful hallways, listening to the laughter of children. A mix of pride and regret filled his chest. "This is incredible, Olivia," he said sincerely. "You've built something amazing here." For the first time in years, Olivia smiled. And this time, it was real. The moment was shattered by the sharp ringing of Ethan's phone. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. "You're not going to answer?" Olivia asked, a shadow crossing her face. Ethan hesitated, then silenced the call. "It's not important right now." But the past never stayed quiet for long. The following afternoon, as Ethan sat in Sophie's hospital room, helping her color, a figure appeared in the doorway. "Ethan." Melissa's voice cut through the air like a knife. His body tensed. "So this is where you've been?" He stood abruptly, his face pale. "Melissa, what are you doing here?" Her eyes flicked between him, Sophie, and Olivia, who had just stepped into the room. "I came to see for myself," Melissa said coldly. Her gaze landed on Sophie. "I see you found your family." The word family carried an unmistakable edge, an accusation. Ethan felt the weight of every wrong choice he had ever made pressing down on him. Olivia's grip on Sophie tightened. "I think you two need to talk," she said stiffly, her voice unreadable. "Come on, sweetheart, let's get some ice cream." As Olivia left with Sophie, Ethan turned to Melissa, knowing this moment was inevitable. The past had caught up with him, and now he had to choose his future. Weeks passed, and Olivia found herself noticing subtle changes in Ethan. He wasn't just present, he was involved. He was attentive not only to Sophie, but to the hospital staff, the other children, even the teachers at her school. One afternoon, as she watched him reading a bedtime story to Sophie, something inside her shifted. A small, fragile spark of hope. Has he really changed? She quickly buried the thought. But before she could dwell on it, the sound of monitors beeping frantically sent a chill down her spine. Sophie's tiny body trembled, her breaths coming in short, uneven gasps. "Sophie." Olivia's heart clenched as she rushed to her daughter's side. Ethan was already there, gripping Sophie's hand as nurses and doctors flooded into the room. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice edged with panic. "She's having a severe arrhythmia," the doctor responded quickly. "We need to stabilize her now." The hours that followed were a slow, agonizing blur. Olivia and Ethan sat side by side in the waiting room, their fear binding them together in a way they hadn't felt in years. Without thinking, Ethan reached for Olivia's hand, squeezing it gently. "She'll be okay," he whispered, though the words were more for himself than for her. She looked down at their intertwined hands, emotions swirling inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. The doors swung open, and Dr. Martinez appeared, looking exhausted but relieved. "We've stabilized her. Sophie is out of danger." A breath Olivia hadn't realized she was holding escaped her lips. Relief washed over them both, and before she could stop herself, Olivia threw her arms around Ethan. For a moment they stayed like that, united in fear, in relief, in something neither of them could name. Ethan saw it in Olivia's eyes, a new vulnerability, something unspoken lingering between them. "Olivia, Before he could finish, the sharp sound of heels clicking against the hospital floor made them both turn. "Melissa, we need to talk," she said, her voice edged with urgency. Immediately, Olivia took a step back, her expression hardening once more. "Go," she said coldly. "Sophie is stable now." Ethan hesitated, his eyes flicking between the two women, knowing whichever choice he made would change everything. Finally, he followed Melissa down the hall to a secluded corner. Olivia watched them go, her stomach twisting. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the way Ethan's face fell, the tension in his posture, the storm in his eyes, made her heart race. When he returned, he looked shaken. "Olivia, there's something you need to know." Melissa cut in before he could continue. "Let me tell her," she said, her voice sharp. "After all, I've been there this whole time." What followed was a revelation Olivia never could have imagined, a tangled web of secrets and deception from Ethan's past. Every word cut like a blade, shredding what little trust had started to rebuild. She felt her world crack apart. Without another word, she turned and walked back into Sophie's hospital room, closing the door behind her. Ethan stood in the hallway, torn between following her and finally facing the consequences of his past with Melissa. The weight of his choices had never felt so heavy. He found himself in the hospital bathroom, staring at his reflection. For the first time in his life, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. Steeling himself, he turned and walked out. Melissa was waiting in the corridor, arms crossed. "It's over," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I'm going to do the right thing, no matter the cost." Melissa let out a cold laugh. "You're throwing everything away for them?" Ethan shook his head. "No, for me. For the man I want to be." Later that evening, he entered the hospital's meeting room, where the board of his company awaited via video conference. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice strong, "I'm stepping down, effective immediately." Shocked voices erupted on the screen. "And one more thing," Ethan added, "I'm donating my shares to fund Olivia's school and Sophie's treatment." Chaos followed, but Ethan didn't care. He ended the call. As he walked out, Olivia was waiting for him. "I heard everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes searched his. "Why?" Ethan turned toward Sophie's hospital room window, watching his daughter sleep. "Because some things are more important than money or power," he said simply. Something in Olivia broke free. "Thank you," she whispered. Months later, Sophie ran across the playground of Olivia's school, her laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. Ethan chased after her, both of them grinning. From the steps of the school, Olivia watched, a soft smile on her lips. Ethan approached, breathless, wrapping an arm around her. "We're a family," he murmured. She didn't argue, she just leaned into him, finally letting go of the past. Ethan looked at Olivia, then down at Sophie, who held both their hands as they walked. "Are we finally home?" he asked softly. Olivia glanced at him, the setting sun casting a warm glow on her face. "Yes," she said, a quiet peace settling in her voice. "We are." They walked together, leaving behind the weight of old wounds and stepping into a future built on love, forgiveness, and second chances. Ethan stole another glance at Olivia and Sophie, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had paid dearly for his mistakes. He had lost time he could never get back. But what he gained in return was priceless. For years he had believed that power and wealth defined success. That money was the ultimate proof of his worth. Now he understood the truth. Happiness wasn't in boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, or the relentless pursuit of ambition. It was here. With his daughter's laughter ringing in his ears and Olivia by his side, he finally knew what it meant to be whole. If this story of redemption, love, and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson did you take from Ethan's journey? Would you like to see more stories about forgiveness, family, and new beginnings? Drop your suggestions below and make sure to subscribe so you never miss our next emotional narrative. Because, like Ethan discovered, sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what we gain, it's what we're willing to give up for love.